Welcome back to the deep dive. You know, the whole security picture in Europe, it's just been turned on its head by the conflict in Ukraine.
Absolutely. It's led to leaders across NATO talking about this Zeitenwende, this major turning point.
Right, and this big rush towards rearmament. The narrative you hear a lot is that Russia is this, well, imminent and overwhelming conventional threat, just waiting to strike NATO. But does that narrative actually hold up when you look at the facts?
Well, that's exactly what we're digging into today. Our mission here is to take a really systematic, data-driven look at the military balance.
Cutting through the rhetoric.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Trying to get to the ground truth. We've structured this deep dive around 6 key areas. Military spending, the big weapon systems, troops, and their readiness, industrial capacity, and then the big one, the nuclear shadow.
Okay, so we're trying to synthesize all this information so you, the listener, can get a clear picture of where things really stand. And maybe we should give the central insight right up front.
Let's do it. The analysis, when you boil it all down, it shows a really clear, overwhelming, conventional military superiority for NATO
Overwhelming.
across pretty much every metric we looked at. There's really only one exception, the strategic equalizer that changes the whole game.
And that's nuclear parity.
That's nuclear parity. Russia's strategic nuclear forces match up with NATO's.
Okay, so if that's the core finding, what does that mean for the bigger picture? This current push for rearmament in the West?
Well, it suggests that this continuous sort of rapid, maybe disproportionate rearmament drive,
Right.
Everyone's scrambling to hit that 2% GDP spending target.
Right.
It might actually be strategically unnecessary and, frankly, fiscally unsustainable in the long run.
Because NATO's conventional edge was already there.
It was already pretty much guaranteed by decades of modernization. The real challenge isn't stopping a Russian conventional attack on NATO. The capability just isn't there.
So the real challenge is...
It's managing the risk of escalation that comes from this massive conventional imbalance we see. That's the danger zone.
That's a really important distinction. Okay, let's start where we have to, I suppose, with the money, the spending, and the history that got us here. To really get a handle on the Russian military today, you got to look back to 91, right? The Soviet collapse.
Absolutely. That period, 1991 onwards, saw a dramatic decline. I mean, the huge Soviet military machine was carved up between the new states.
And then years of economic problems, plus things like the CFE treaty.
Right, the Conventional Armed Forces in Europe Treaty. That meant massive scaling back. Modernization just stalled for, almost 2 decades. They were basically living off the old Soviet inventory.
Okay, so a period of real decay, but then came reform efforts.
Several attempts. The big one initially was the New Look reforms around 2008 under Defense Minister Serdyukov.
What was the main goal there?
The core idea was professionalization, to shift away from that old Soviet mass mobilization model towards something, leaner, more agile, capable of rapid intervention.
Kind of like what NATO was doing in the late 90s.
Very similar concept. The goal was more professional contract soldiers than on Trackniki and less reliance on masses of conscripts.
But, and this is interesting, Russia never fully went all professional, did they? They kept that hybrid system.
No, they always maintained that mix of contract soldiers and conscripts. But even while they were trying to professionalize, the spending was already significant.
Even before 2022.
Oh, yeah. Even before the full-scale invasion, Russia was consistently spending around 4% of its GDP on defense annually.
4%, that's double the target NATO set for its own members.
Exactly. Which brings us neatly to the spending disparity today. And the scale here, it's just massive. You really need to grasp this.
Okay, lay it out for us.
Globally, if you add up all the defense budgets, NATO countries together spend about 10 times more than Russia right now.
10 times.
We're talking roughly $1.19 trillion for NATO versus an estimated $127 billion for Russia currently.
That's hard to even picture. But okay, what about just Europe? If we take the U.S. out of the equation.
Even then, European NATO members plus Canada spend significantly more than Russia. And this is where we need to talk about purchasing power parity, or PPP.
Right. The idea that a ruble spent in Russia buys more military stuff locally than a dollar or euro would in the West.
Precisely. Because domestic arms production and personnel costs are generally lower. But even when you apply those generous PPP adjustments,
NATO Europe still comes out ahead.
Comfortably. The estimates put NATO Europe around $420 billion in PPP adjusted dollars, compared to maybe $300 billion for Russia.
So the sheer economic weight just overwhelms any cheaper domestic production argument.
Pretty much. The volume, the technological sophistication, the training, the maintenance, what NATO can afford, far outstrips Russia's capacity, even accounting for PPP.
And the strain this puts on Russia's economy must be immense.
It's severe. Right now, estimates suggest Russia is spending around 1/3 of its entire state budget on the military. Reaching about 7.1% of its GDP in 2024. That's a huge economic mobilization. It essentially means the civilian economy is taking a backseat to the military-industrial complex.
Would that last?
Most analysts think it's fundamentally unsustainable long-term. Historically, you only see spending levels like that during major total wars. And even Russia's own internal budget plans seem to acknowledge this.
How so?
Official plans project significant falls in defense spending for 2025 and 2026, assuming the war's intensity decreases. It signals they know they can't keep this up indefinitely.
Okay, so if Russia is straining under this burden, what's driving the big NATO spending surge? Especially that 2% GDP target. European spending jumped massively after 2014.
It did. Over 70% growth between 2014 and 2024 in Europe. But that 2% goal? You need context.
It wasn't based on a specific threat assessment.
Not really. It was set back in 2014 largely as a political signal about burden sharing, mainly at the urging of the U.S. It wasn't derived from military strategic requirement based on what Russia could actually do.
Which makes it kind of an arbitrary target.
Exactly. And the source material points out this can lead to, frankly, absurd results.
Like the Greece and Germany comparison from a few years back.
That's the perfect example. Greece was in a massive economic crisis. Its defense budget was shrinking in real terms.
But it met the 2% target.
Because its GDP was shrinking even faster.
Yep.
Meanwhile, Germany increased its defense spending significantly.
But still fell short of the target because its overall economy was growing faster than its defense budget.
Right. It just shows it's an economic metric, not a strategic one. It doesn't measure capability or readiness against Russia. It's about political commitment. That's crucial when you just look at raw spending figures. Money doesn't automatically buy effective military power overnight.
Okay, let's shift from the budgets, the abstract money, to the actual hardware. The tanks, the planes, the ships. You mentioned a stark asymmetry.
It is stark. If you look at pretty much every major conventional weapon category, tanks, armored vehicles, artillery, major warships, submarines, combat aircraft.
All of them.
Just about all of them. NATO outnumbers Russia by at least 3-1, sometimes much more.
3-1. That's not a slight edge.
No, it's an overwhelming numerical superiority. It fundamentally shapes what kind of conventional war Russia could even think about fighting.
And the recent NATO expansion, Finland and Sweden joining, that's tilted the balance even further.
Definitely. Strategically very significant, especially up in the Baltic region.
How so? What did Finland bring, for instance?
Finland adds considerable land power. They have over 700 large-caliber artillery pieces, 630 mortars. I mean, that's more tube artillery than Poland, Germany, Norway, and Sweden combined.
Wow. And Sweden.
Sweden brings nearly 100 modern JAS-39 Gripen fighter jets, very capable aircraft, plus advanced conventional submarines specifically designed for the Baltic's tricky, shallow waters. That makes the whole Baltic Sea theater much more defensible for NATO.
Okay, let's zoom in now, especially on the Russian Aerospace Forces, the VKS. You mentioned this was an area Russia really tried to prioritize for modernization since the 2000s.
They did. The goal was to create a modern air force capable of projecting power. But let's look at the numbers.
Go ahead.
Globally, NATO has around 5,400 combat aircraft. Even just in Europe, NATO fields over 2,000.
And Russia?
Russia has about 1,026 total. So even just looking at Europe, the ratio is over 2-1 in NATO's favor and much higher globally.
Where's the near parity then? You mentioned one category.
Strategic bombers, the big long-range ones. The U.S. has about 140, Russia has around 129. But these are primarily for the nuclear mission, not for conventional air superiority fights.
Got it. So beyond sheer numbers, what about the technology, the generation gap?
Well, both sides still rely heavily on fourth-generation fighters. Think F-16s, Eurofighters, Rafales for NATO.
Versus modernized MiGs and Sukhoi for Russia, like the MiG-35 or Su-37.
Exactly. That's the standard workhorse for both. But the critical difference, the game changer, is the fifth generation. Stealth technology, sensor fusion.
And this is where NATO has pulled way ahead.
Decisively. The U.S. and its allies have deployed or planned for over 900 F-35s. The F-35 isn't just stealthy. Its sensor fusion makes it like a flying command post, sharing vast amounts of data.
A huge force multiplier.
Absolutely. And Russia's answer to this?
The Su-57 Felon.
Their comparable model, yes. And it's been, frankly, a near-total failure in terms of actual deployment and capability.
How many are actually in service?
Only about 12. 12 operational Su-57s. Their goal is a modest 76 by 2028, which is just completely non-competitive globally.
That failure speaks volumes about their industrial and tech limitations, doesn't it?
It's a profound strategic signal, yes. And we'll touch more on the industrial side later. But it gets worse.
Worse.
Even their more reliable modernization efforts, like the Su-34 bomber, a capable aircraft they focused on.
Production is slow.
Critically slow. Even before the war, they were making maybe 8 to 12 a year. Now, under sanctions and shortages, it's dropped to around 7 per year.
7 per year? How does that compare to losses in Ukraine?
It's completely overwhelmed. Estimates suggest Russia lost around 100 combat aircraft by early 2024, maybe more now.
So at 7 replacements per year.
They can't replace their combat losses within a decade. Not even close. The VKS is actively shrinking and aging at the same time.
An air force in decline, essentially.
In terms of modern platforms, yes. But there's another massive constraint, a logistical one that people often miss.
Which is?
Air refueling tankers. The planes that let fighters stay airborne longer and fly further.
Okay, how do they stack up there?
Russia has only about 15 operational tankers. 15.
And NATO?
NATO has a fleet of 340.
15 versus 340, that's staggering.
It's a huge difference. Without adequate air refueling, the VKS's operational range, its ability to project power or sustain operations deep inside enemy territory, is severely limited. They're basically tied to operating close to their own bases.
So any idea of a sustained conventional air campaign against NATO, deep strikes, anything like that, it's logistically impossible.
Pretty much, yeah. Regardless of the number of fighters they technically have on paper.
Okay. What about land and naval systems? Is the picture similar for replacing losses?
Just as stark, if not worse, on the ground. The armored vehicle losses in Ukraine are staggering. We're talking over 3,000 tanks lost, maybe over 5,000 other armored vehicles.
Put that in perspective.
That's more tanks than their entire active fleet before the invasion started.
And how are they replacing them? Not with new T-90s or anything?
No. They're pulling ancient Soviet scrap out of deep storage. T-62s, T-72s, tanks that are 50, 60 years old.
So they're replacing relatively modern, though maybe flawed, units with significantly older, less capable ones.
Exactly. It's the inverse of modernization. And at the same time, all those much-hyped next-generation ground systems.
The T-14 Armada tank, the Kurgana's infantry vehicle, the Boomerang APC.
All delayed, stalled, possibly even canceled. It mirrors the Su-57 failure. Russia just can't seem to produce complex, next-gen military hardware at any meaningful scale.
And the Navy, apart from the nuclear submarines.
Outside the Northern Fleet, which is really focused on the nuclear deterrent, the Russian Navy is increasingly just a coastal defense force.
And the symbol of this decay is probably their only aircraft carrier, the Admiral Kuznetsov.
Oh, absolutely. This has become almost a running joke. Stuck in repairs since 2018 after accidents, dock collapses, fires.
Reports of massive corruption and embezzlement of its repair funds, too.
Right. And it's famous for belching thick black smoke, from its old conventional engines. It just screams inefficiency and decay.
Even in the Black Sea, their own backyard.
The Black Sea Fleet had to retreat from its main base in Crimea to Novorossiysk because of Ukrainian drone and missile strikes. It highlights their limited ability to project power even regionally.
The overall message seems to be a lack of logistical, technological, and industrial capacity for sustained, large-scale conventional power projection.
That's the inescapable conclusion, yes.
Okay, so the hardware gap is huge. But war isn't just about machines, right? It's about the people operating them, the human factor.
Absolutely critical. Manpower, training, logistics, readiness. These reinforce that conventional gap.
Let's start with the basic numbers, personnel strength.
NATO boasts around 3.3 million active personnel. About 2 million of those are in Europe. And behind them, a massive reserve force of 3.4 million.
Okay, and Russia?
Russia has about 1.3 million active personnel on paper. But critically, only about 40% of those, maybe 540,000, are stationed west of the Urals in the potential European theater.
And that number is under immense pressure from casualties in Ukraine.
Under profound pressure.
Oh.
The casualty shock is real. Estimates range wildly, but we're talking potentially over 350,000, maybe even up to 600,000 killed or wounded by late 2024, early 2025.
Those are staggering numbers. How does that affect recruitment and training?
It makes it incredibly difficult. Russia announced plans to boost its active force to 1.5 million, but analysts are really skeptical they can hit that number while maintaining any kind of quality.
Yep.
They're struggling to replace losses, let alone expand.
Which brings us to the quality question. Training, readiness. How did Russia look going into the conflict?
Well, the early stages exposed some deep flaws, problems with command structure, operational planning, and really significant logistical shortcomings.
The battalion tactical groups, the BTGs, they were supposed to be the tip of the spear.
They were often understaffed, poorly trained, especially when bulked out with hastily mobilized conscripts or reservists. They just weren't cohesive or well supported.
And those persistent internal problems within the Russian military. Corruption, hazing.
They absolutely play a role. Things like endemic corruption, ghost soldiers who only exist on paper for pay purposes, the brutal hazing culture known as DDoS China.
These aren't just footnotes.
No, they actively corrode morale, trust, and effectiveness from within. And now, to cope with the sheer scale of losses, they're resorting to recruiting, well, lower quality personnel.
Like prisoners, men from very poor regions.
Exactly. And they're fast-tracking officer training, shortening courses significantly.
So what does that do on the battlefield?
It leads to higher attrition rates and much lower tactical effectiveness. You lose experienced NCOs and junior officers, replace them with poorly trained ones, and performance plummets. It pushes them towards grinding attritional warfare because they lack the skill for complex maneuvers.
And how does NATO compare on the human factor?
Well, NATO has decades of experience in complex multinational operations. Since 1999, Kosovo, Afghanistan, Iraq, other stabilization missions. There's deep institutional knowledge about interoperability, joint operations, logistics.
Things Russia clearly struggled with in Ukraine.
Demonstrated it really doesn't possess at scale, yes. NATO's whole structure is built for this kind of complex cooperation.
What about NATO's readiness model now? There's the new force model, the NFM.
Right. The NFM is designed to create a much more responsive force. The goal is to be able to mobilize 500,000 troops within 180 days.
500,000 troops in 6 months.
And critically, an initial high-readiness force of 100,000 deployable within just 10 days. That's the first echelon, ready to go quickly. It marks a real shift back towards deterring high-intensity conflict.
But getting those forces, especially the heavy ones, to the fight, that's still a challenge.
It's the challenge, even with great troops and gear. Moving something like a U.S. Armored Brigade combat team that's hundreds of tanks and vehicles, thousands of soldiers, tons of ammo from the U.S. to, say, Poland or the Baltics.
How long does that take?
It can still take 4 to 8 weeks, maybe longer.
So infrastructure becomes key.
Absolutely. Ports, railways, roads, pre-positioned stockpiles and depots, especially in places like Germany and Poland. Improving that transit infrastructure is crucial for making the NFM credible. NATO has the people, but getting the heavy metal there quickly and sustaining it is the practical hurdle.
What about Russia's command structure? On paper, they have a unified command, unlike NATO's coalition approach. Is that an advantage?
Theoretically, yes. A single standing structure, like their National Defense Management Center, NDMC, and the Joint Strategic Commands, OSKs, should allow for faster decision-making than a 32-nation alliance needing consensus.
But in practice, in Ukraine?
In practice, that centralized system seemed to fail spectacularly during the initial invasion. It proved too rigid. Orders didn't adapt to realities on the ground. Units, especially those BTGs, operated in isolation without proper support.
Particularly air support.
Yes. Coordination between the VKS and ground forces was consistently reported as poor. The top-down system was too brittle for a dynamic, multi-front war.
And circling back to logistics again, strategic airlift, Russia has some huge transport planes, right? The Antonovs.
They do, including about 10 massive Antonov An-124s, some of the biggest cargo planes in the world. Yeah. But again, the lack of air-to-air refueling tankers severely limits their ability to use those planes effectively for rapidly deploying combat forces over long distances. They can move stuff, but not sustain a major airlift operation far from home base.
So it keeps coming back to the same point. A structural inability to project and sustain major conventional power much beyond their own borders.
That seems to be the consistent theme, yes. They can mass forces nearby, but a deep, sustained offensive into well-defended NATO territory looks structurally impossible based on these factors.
Okay, let's talk about the industrial base, because ultimately, a military runs on what its factories can produce, right?
Absolutely. And here, the disparity is perhaps even starker than in hardware numbers. NATO's industrial dominance is overwhelming.
How do we quantify that?
Well, look at the world's top 100 defense companies. Who dominates that list?
U.S. firms, European firms.
Overwhelmingly. Almost three-quarters, about 71.7% of global defense sales are handled by companies based in the U.S., which accounts for over half itself, and other NATO countries.
70%. That's a huge share of the global market.
It represents an unmatched capacity for R&D, for complex systems integration, for mass production of sophisticated weaponry.
And Russia's share of that top 100.
Tiny. Only 2 Russian conglomerates even make the list, and together they account for just 3.5% of global sales.
3.5% versus over 70%.
It's a massive gap. And it fundamentally limits Russia's ability to modernize its forces in the long term or to replace complex systems like that Su-57 we talked about.
So what's Russia's industrial strategy then, given this limitation?
It's forced to pivot. Analysts call it shifting to a Kalashnikov Wirtschaft, a Kalashnikov economy. Meaning focusing less on cutting-edge, high-tech, integrated systems, the F-35 or T-14 equivalents, and more on churning out simple, robust, high volumes of basic stuff. Ammunition, refurbish older tanks, simpler drones, volume over complexity.
That sounds like a strategy born of necessity, maybe even desperation.
It is. But they've successfully mobilized their economy for this. The defense sector output reportedly jumped 60% in early 2024 compared to pre-invasion levels.
How did they manage that?
Longer mandatory working hours, shifting production lines, massive state investment funneled into military factories.
And creating jobs in the process.
Over 500,000 new jobs, reportedly, in the military-industrial complex. It now employs around 3.5 million workers, but there are huge limits and consequences.
Okay, what are the limits?
Well, take artillery shells, a key item in this war. They've ramped up production significantly, maybe 1.7 million, 152 millimeter shells per year now.
But the usage rate is much higher.
Much higher. Estimates suggest they need closer to 4 million shells annually just to sustain the current tempo of fighting. So even with the surge, production can't keep up with expenditure.
Which forces them back to
reactivating those old stored Soviet stockpiles. Often unreliable, 50-year-old ammo and equipment. It's the opposite of improving quality.
And the economic side effects of this Kalashnikov economy?
Severe. It's fueling high inflation. It's creating critical labor shortages in the civilian economy because so many workers have been pulled into defense or the military itself.
How many people are we talking about?
Estimates suggest up to 2.9 million people have been shifted out of the regular workforce and into military or defense-related jobs since 2020. That puts a massive strain on other sectors. It's sacrificing long-term economic health for short-term military output.
What about sanctions? Were they supposed to cripple this industrial machine?
Well, the impact has been mixed. Their rollout was somewhat delayed and not fully comprehensive initially, and Russia had been preparing for sanctions since 2014, so they haven't been crippled.
But sanctions are having some effect, especially on high tech.
Definitely. Russia remains heavily reliant on imports for critical high-tech components, advanced semiconductors, precision optics, things needed for modern guidance systems, communications, etc.
Where are they getting these components now?
This creates major vulnerabilities. China is now the key supplier, providing perhaps 70% of Russia's technology imports, including semiconductors, but often these are commercial-grade components, not military spec.
Which affects reliability and performance.
Potentially, yes. It introduces quality control issues and highlights a strategic dependence.
And beyond components, they're also importing actual weapons systems now.
Yes, they've become reliant on a few key suppliers willing to bypass sanctions. North Korea is reportedly supplying millions of artillery shells and various missile systems.
And Iran.
Iran is crucial for providing drones, the Shahed-type drones, and reportedly short-range ballistic missiles like the Fate 360.
So this external reliance really underlines the weakness in their own domestic high-tech industrial base.
It absolutely does. They're forced into strategic dependency because they can't produce enough of these critical systems themselves.
Okay, so stepping back from the industry picture, the conclusion seems pretty consistent across spending, hardware, personnel, and now industry.
Right. NATO possesses a clear, deep, overwhelming conventional superiority. Russia's capacity for any kind of sustained, large-scale conventional fight beyond Ukraine seems severely constrained.
And yet, the threat perception in NATO remains high.
Which brings us to the ultimate factor.
Exactly. This is where the entire calculation shifts dramatically.
Yeah.
Because all that conventional superiority, it's effectively checked by the strategic equalizer, nuclear weapons.
This is the one area where there's parity.
It's the only parameter where approximate parity exists, and it ensures mutually assured destruction, or MAD. That's the grim reality. Let's look at the numbers. How close are they?
Russia has around 5,580 nuclear warheads in total. The three NATO nuclear powers, the US, France, and the UK combined, have about 5,559.
Virtually identical numbers.
Close enough that it doesn't matter strategically. Both the US and Russia also maintain the nuclear triad.
Meaning they can launch from land-based missiles, bombers in the air, and submarines hidden in the ocean.
Right. And that submarine leg is crucial. Submarine-launched ballistic missiles, SLBMs, guarantee a second strike capability.
Meaning even if one side launches a surprise attack, the other side's subs can retaliate.
Exactly. Ensuring devastation for both. That's the bedrock of nuclear deterrence. It's meant to make a first strike unthinkable.
But the system built to manage this terrifying balance, it's falling apart.
It's collapsing. Painstakingly built over decades, the arms control architecture is crumbling. The INF Treaty banning intermediate-range missiles in Europe is gone. Russia withdrew from the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty ratification.
And the big one, New START.
The last remaining major treaty. It limits the U.S. and Russia to 1,550 deployed strategic warheads each. It's set to expire in February 2026.
And it's basically non-functional now anyway.
Effectively suspended by both sides. Crucially, this ended mutual inspections and data exchanges that have been happening since 2011, with pauses during COVID and then the suspension.
So the transparency is gone.
The main mechanism for verifying compliance and building a minimum level of trust is gone. Without it, both sides are back to relying on national intelligence, estimates, assumptions, worst-case planning.
Which is inherently destabilizing.
Highly unstable. It creates pressure to build up forces just in case the other side is cheating or building up secretly.
And this decay directly links to the risk of lowering the nuclear threshold, making nuclear use seem more possible.
Yes, especially for Russia. Their official doctrine explicitly views nuclear weapons, including non-strategic or tactical nuclear weapons.
Lower yield, shorter range ones.
Right. They see these as the essential counterweight to NATO's massive conventional advantage. The doctrine reserves the right to use nuclear weapons if the very existence of the Russian state is threatened.
Even by a conventional attack, if it involves a nuclear power like the US, UK, or France.
That's the implication. It's a deliberate ambiguity.
Yeah.
Because they know they likely can't win a large-scale conventional war against NATO, the nuclear threat becomes the ultimate backstop, the way to deter NATO from ever pressing its conventional advantage too far.
A dangerous linkage.
Very. And it's compounded by ongoing modernization on both sides. Russia is heavily focused on ensuring its second strike capability survives, particularly modernizing its submarine fleet. Both sides are developing new delivery systems, including hypersonic weapons.
And we're seeing new deployments in Europe that feel like echoes of the Cold War.
Absolutely. The planned stationing of U.S. long-range Tomahawk cruise missiles and potentially hypersonic weapons in Germany starting in 2026.
These can strike deep into Russia.
Yes. And from Russia's perspective, this is a major escalation. Critics argue it crosses a red line and inevitably invites Russian mirror image measures deploying similar systems targeting NATO territory.
It's exactly the kind of tit-for-tat deployment spiral the INF Treaty was designed to prevent.
Precisely. And we also have NATO's existing nuclear sharing arrangements,
where U.S. tactical nuclear bombs, the B-61s, are stored in Europe.
Yes, currently in 5 countries: Belgium, Germany, Italy, the Netherlands, and Turkey. Allied aircraft are trained to deliver them. And there's been talk, especially recently, about potentially extending this arrangement to newer members like Poland.
So it's this incredibly complex, tense picture, overwhelming NATO conventional power met by Russian nuclear parity and a doctrine that links the two, all happening amidst the collapse of arms control.
That's the strategic stalemate we find ourselves in. #tag 7, conclusion and final thought.
Okay, so we set out today to really get under the hood of Russia's military capability versus NATO, looking hard at the VKS, the ground forces, the whole picture, trying to cut through some of the noise. And the data, as we've walked through it, seems remarkably clear. Conventionally, manpower, equipment, spending, industrial-based NATO holds an overwhelming advantage.
It's deep-seated and comprehensive.
Russia's ability to wage, let alone sustain, a large-scale conventional war beyond Ukraine seems severely limited by everything we've discussed. Massive equipment losses, logistical bottlenecks, training issues, industrial constraints.
The capacity just isn't there for a major conventional assault on the alliance.
But the core challenge, the central dilemma remains. that dichotomy you mentioned at the start.
Exactly. NATO's conventional dominance is real, but it's ultimately checked by Russia's nuclear arsenal. That nuclear path the stalemate holds.
So the real danger isn't necessarily a bolt-from-the-blue conventional attack.
The source materials suggest the greater danger lies elsewhere. It's the escalation spiral. It's the breakdown of arms control, the deployment of new destabilizing weapons in Europe, the increasing reliance Russia might place on its nuclear options precisely because its conventional forces are degraded. That's where the risk of catastrophic miscalculation lies.
So the key takeaway for you, our listener, might be this. NATO's conventional superiority wasn't really in doubt. It was guaranteed by decades of investment and modernization before the current rearmament surge.
Right. The superiority was already there.
So this current rush to hit that 2% target, pouring billions more into defense, it risks diverting huge resources from other critical needs, social programs, education, infrastructure, the green transition,
while arguably adding little marginal strategic gain against Russia's actual trump card, which remains its nuclear deterrent. Piling up more conventional forces doesn't negate the nuclear backstop.
We already possess that clear conventional advantage.
Indisputably.
So perhaps we can leave you with a final provocative thought to consider.
Given NATO's undeniable conventional edge and the simultaneous, very real danger of an unchecked nuclear arms race now that arms control is collapsing,
should the strategic focus perhaps shift? Less on simply accelerating conventional rearmament, buying more and more hardware,
and more towards urgently restoring some form of institutionalized dialogue with Russia, starting with a serious diplomatic effort to somehow save or replace the New START treaty before it expires in 2026.
Is the priority now less about adding more conventional deterrence and more about preventing the existing conventional imbalance from inadvertently triggering a nuclear escalation?
Something to really ponder as you continue your own deep dive into this critical security landscape.
Thank you for joining us.